Welcome to Daily Living with Father Chapin, where we cruise through the Catholic liturgy of the Word, trying to dig out the deeper meanings of Scripture and how they might apply into our daily living. Yes, my friend, that is what we do. We are on a mission. We're looking for the deeper meanings of Scripture. You know, sometimes the Bible can be a bit confusing, so we bust it down like a fraction. We're asking questions along the way. Questions like, hey, what do these Gospels have to do with me? How can I take these Gospels and apply them into my daily living so that I can become a reflection of God's love to a world that, well, let's face it, certainly doesn't know God and definitely is in deep need of more love, don't you think? I mean, take a look around, my friend. There's a lot of bad news out there. How can I take the good news of Jesus Christ as presented in His Gospels and apply it into my daily living so that I can become a light in this darkness? I want to be a tool in the hand of God, making present His kingdom. I want to make a difference. I want to make a dent, not someday, but today and every day. That's what this show is all about. So glad that you could join us today as we celebrate the 13th Sunday in Ordinary Time. But like I always say, is there any such thing as ordinary time? I said, no, time is a gift, and we should use it wisely. Got a great show for you today. Looking forward to getting into it. But before I do, I just, I get letters from time to time. And I got a letter the other day from Patricia. She's out of Weirton. Patricia, I hope you're watching today. She tells me she watches every Sunday. And she thanked me and said that she really liked the show and that I made things understandable for her. And I'm just telling you, Patricia, these kind of letters, that's what it's all about for me. I mean, when I get a letter like that, that's why I do what I do. Okay, you're the reason that I'm motivated to come to each and every week and explain the Gospels. When I get a letter like that, that's just wonderful. And I want to thank you very much for that. What do you say we just take a moment to quiet our minds and put ourselves in the presence of the Lord? God is constantly trying to speak to us, and he uses many different ways to do this. One way is the quiet voice. And that quiet voice, well, it's quiet. And it won't raise itself up to compete with the cacophony of screaming voices of this world that are saying, go here, do this, buy that, wear that, take a picture, send it to your friend, that kind of thing. And since it won't raise itself up, we've got to cut through the clatter and dial ourselves in. And there's a lot of ways to do that, but one really, really powerful way is through His Word, because you see, His Word is alive. His Word, the Bible is not like any other book. It's not just dead words on a page. I mean, it's living. And the thing, it's malleable, a word. I can read something and you can read the same thing, and we can take two completely different messages out of it, and guess what? We're both right. Because you see, God has a message for you. He has a message for me. The question is, are we ready to hear the message? My prayer for you today is that you open up your heart and receive that message, that I open up my ears and receive the message. I spend so much time running here, running there, doing that. When do I just stop and say, where am I going? What am I doing? Lord, lead me. And that's what we're going to do right now. So what do you say? I quit yipping about it. We get right on into it, okay? Our gospel today is coming from the Gospel of Mark, a reading from the Holy Gospel. According to Mark, when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a large crowd gathered around him, and he stayed close to the sea. One of the synagogue officials named Jairus came forward. Seeing him, he fell at his feet and pleaded earnestly with him, saying, my daughter is at the point of death. Please come lay your hands on her that she may get well and live. He went off with him, and a large crowd followed him and pressed upon him. There was a woman afflicted with hemorrhages for 12 years. She had suffered greatly at the hands of many doctors and had spent all that she had, yet she was not helped, but only grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. She said, "If I but touch his clothes, I shall be cured." Immediately the flow of blood dried up. She felt in her body that she was healed of her affliction. Jesus, aware at once that power had gone out from him, turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" But his disciples said to Jesus, "You see how this crowd is pressing upon you, yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done it. The woman, realizing what had happened to her, approached in fear and trembling. She fell down before Jesus and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be cured of your affliction." While he was still speaking, people from the synagogue official's house arrived and said, "Your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher any longer?" Disregarding the message that was reported, Jesus said to the synagogue official, "Do not be afraid, just have faith." He did not allow anyone to accompany him inside except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they had arrived at the house of the synagogue official, he caught sight of all the commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. So he went in and he said to them, "Why this commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but asleep." And they ridiculed him. Then he put them all out. He took along the child's father and mother and those who were with him and entered the room where the child was. He took the child by the hand and he said to her, "Talitha quam," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." The girl, a child of 12, arose immediately and walked around. At that, they were utterly astounded. He gave strict orders that no one should know this, and he said she should be given something to eat. The gospel of the Lord, and what a gospel it is. This is Daily Living. I'm Father Chapin. You stick around. We'll be right back, and we're going to talk about this gospel and a few other things here as we celebrate this incredible gospel that the church gives us as we celebrate the 13th Sunday in Ordinary Time. Hi, this is Father Chapin, host of Daily Living. What a pleasure it is to come into your home each and every week to spread the good news, but it's very expensive. Now, I got good news and bad news. The good news is we got plenty of money. The bad news is still in your pocket. So if you'd like to help the ministry, please send a check to Daily Living at 325 West Main Street, White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, 24986. And together we take the good news to a lost world. Welcome back to Daily Living. So today we find ourselves picking up on a theme we've been talking about over the last several weeks. If you've been with us, we've been on a journey through the Gospel of Mark, and things, well, they're starting to heat up a bit. The word is out. All throughout Jerusalem and Israel, there is a buzz concerning this man of God, this wonder healer, the miracles, the healings, the raising of the dead. There is even a quiet whisper that maybe he could be the one, you know, the promised Messiah that will deliver them from the oppression of the Romans. And the crowds have swollen bigger than they've ever been before as they seek to answer the God question. Many have become disillusioned with sacrificial temple worship. Some are just curious. Others, I guess the majority of them, well, they got issues, you know, they have needs, as I suppose many of us do. You know, celebrity status, it just ain't all it's cracked up to be, to tell you the truth. You know, my brother was living in Aspen, Colorado for some time, and he's told me many stories about the plight of the celebrity. And he's telling me this one time, he's talking to this gentleman who's particularly famous, and they're at a public place, and he told me that he was just absolutely astonished, stunned, that over the course of, say, 15 or 20 minutes, how many rude tourists just like interrupted their conversation, just demanding an autograph from this guy. Finally, this one particular guy was particularly rude, demanding an autograph. My brother just stood in front of him and said, "Would you please leave Mr. So-and-so alone?" And it was almost like this guy was like in a dream. It was just a stupor. He just woke up and, oh, okay, and walked away. And the celebrity looked at my brother. He said, what, are you my bodyguard now? He said, thanks, appreciate that. You know, I said all that to say this. That's what Jesus is dealing with now. And we've seen over the last couple of weeks, it's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Jesus teaching huge crowds by the side of the Sea of Galilee. And then, of course, last week we had the storm at sea. Finally gets to the other side, immediately confronted with a demon, cast out the demon, throws the demon into a herd of swine. They run off a cliff. They all die. The village comes, begs him to just leave. So he gets in the boat, goes across the lake once again. What is he met with? Yet another huge crowd. In fact, it's so big, it's hard for him to even get off the boat. Now, I'll tell you all that to say this, okay? Jesus was not a selfish person. He gave everything. Every action he took, even when he was angry, was rooted in compassion, right? He was always feeling how the other people felt, as he felt other people's pain. Now, all of that brings us to our gospel today. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a large crowd gathered around him, and he stayed close to the sea. One of the synagogue officials named Jairus came forward. So here we have a synagogue official. His name is Jairus. He's not a priest or a rabbi or a bishop or anything like that. It's kind of like a deacon, I suppose, you know, responsible for the daily running of the synagogue. This is his job. It's his livelihood. It's his status in the community. He would have commanded great respect, and everything that he had, the respect and position in society, was connected with the uniform that he wore. His tunic, as well as his headdress, identified him as an official of the synagogue. Now, keep in mind, by this time, word had come down from on high, from the high priests, the Pharisees, and the Sanhedrin, that this man, Jesus, he was dangerous. He was trouble with a capital T and was to be watched carefully. So professionally, Jairus was to watch Jesus and report back. But personally and emotionally, there's something else going on here. You see, Jairus was experiencing a living nightmare at this time because his daughter, who he loved more than life itself, and more than anything he could imagine, was suffering a great illness, and she was not getting better. Now, given his stature of being a synagogue official, I'm quite sure that all the best doctors in the land had already been to her bedside, and well, the outcome was bleak. Jairus had left her bedside this day to come out to see this prophet, this wonder healer with supposed magical powers. He had been praying to his God without ceasing for healing, and nothing was happening. And I'm sure that when his own people had declared Jesus was a fraud, well, that must have been just like salt on the wound, really. But when he gets there and he looks at Jesus, something, it just comes over him. And I don't think that this was really planned, but sometimes you become so desperate, you're so grasping at straws for some grasp of hope, you're willing to try anything. And this is what happens. He falls at the feet of Jesus. This uniformed synagogue official goes to the ground, right? The Greek for to fall is pifta, all right? So pifta is a word that is normally associated not with worship, but rather with begging. Now keep in mind, as he falls to the ground, getting that uniform all dirty and dusty, groveling, his position at the synagogue, along with the respect in the community, all that, it's gone, right? He has thrown it all away in the face of a flicker of hope. This is what Jesus is looking at. Now, of course, Jesus sees all of that. He gets it. He understands. Now remember, this man Jairus represents, maybe not directly, but at least indirectly, the very people and institution that is plotting to have him killed, right? My daughter is at the point of death, Please come lay your hands on her so that she may get well and live. So we don't know exactly what was said at this point. I mean, Scripture's silent as to what words might have been exchanged. Maybe there were no words. Maybe it was just a nod of the head. But whatever it was, they're off to the house of Jairus immediately. And the crowds jostle and shove for position. And I can just see the disciples. They're trying to form this protective ring around Jesus. And I imagine the going was a bit slow. So all of a sudden, in the midst of what can only be described as like a soccer scrum, Jesus looks up and says, "Who touched me?" And I'm thinking, really? Who touched you? And I imagine that's what the disciples are thinking. Are you serious? Who touched? Look at this crowd. How can you say, "Who touched you?" But you see, something inside of Jesus had come out, and he felt it go. Keep in mind, many people in the past had bumped into Jesus, and this had never happened before. The power had never been released, but this time it had. And it really kind of paints a beautiful picture of the relationship Jesus has with his Father, because Jesus is all about doing the Father's will all the time, 24/7, sometimes when he doesn't even know he's doing it, right? Who touched him? Well, who touched him was a woman who had absolutely no business being there. Oh, no, no, no. In fact, if it was discovered that she was there in the crowd, she could have been taken out to the city gate and stoned to death. The fact that she is there is a capital offense. She has been having a flow of blood for 12 years, and to the Jew, that makes one unclean, defiled, like a leper. And anybody that touches somebody that's unclean becomes themselves unclean. So let me ask you a question. How many people you think that woman rubbed up against as she was going through that crowd trying to reach Jesus, right? So anyway, it's a big deal that she's even there. Capital offense. So it says that she had suffered greatly at the hands of many doctors and spent all she had. So one can assume that this woman, at least at one time of her life, was a woman of means. She had money because she could afford these doctors. Now she has nothing. But like Jairus, she has heard of this great wonder healer coming to her shore. So she wraps herself up tightly in a cloak and disguises herself, and she makes her way into the crowd. What little strength she had, what little life she had left, she risked it all. She rolled the dice on a thread of hope. And like Jairus, I don't think she really knew exactly what she was going to do when she got there. I don't think that this was planned, but when she got there, evidently that quiet voice, that quiet voice whispered in her ear, "Touch his cloak." And with that, she began to push. This is Daily Living on Father Chapin. You hang out. We'll be right back, and we will continue to talk about this amazing gospel that comes to us here as we celebrate the 13th Sunday in Ordinary Time. Hi, this is Father Chapin, host of Daily Living. What a pleasure it is to come into your home each and every week to spread the good news, but it's very expensive. Now, I got good news and bad news. The good news is we got plenty of money. The bad news is still in your pocket. So if you'd like to help the ministry, please send a check to Daily Living at 325 West Main Street, White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, 24986. And together we take the good news to a lost world. Welcome back to Daily Living. Now, just for the break, we were talking about this woman. She's got a hemorrhage. She's been bleeding for 12 years. This makes her unclean in her culture. She's an outcast. She is defiled. She hears of this wonder healer coming to her shore. Even though she's not allowed to go out in public, okay, she rolls the dice. She risks it all. She disguises herself and goes out to see him. Not real sure exactly what she's going to do when she gets there, but when she does, the quiet voice whispers in her ear, "Touch his cloak." And with that, she begins to push her way through the crowd. This weak woman, with almost all the life drained out of her, pushes herself through that scrum, reaching between the disciples, trying to protect Jesus. She grabs on, touches his cloak. Well, the Greek is much more of a clutching, right? Rather than simply a touch. I figured she probably wanted to make sure it was going to stick, right? So she grabs on, and in an instant, boom, gray turns to sparkling blue. Everything changes. As in that moment, she feels the power flowing out of Jesus into her, and immediately, boom, blood dries up. I mean, wow, wow. But as Jesus becomes aware that the power has left his body, he turns around and says, "Who touched me?" So, I mean, she is so busted, right? Immediately, her joy turns to fear. Now, remember, she's not even supposed to be there. It is a death sentence, capital offense, if they find out that she's there. This woman, realizing what had happened to her, approaches in fear and trembling. A Greek word for trembling is tremusa, which literally translates into tremors. She is literally shaking, right? And like Jairus before her, she piphtas, right? She falls at his feet. Now notice the juxtaposition here of the highest of the high of the social status, which is Jairus, of course, and this lowest of the low, this unclean banished woman, okay? Both of them together. But this is her moment. She falls down before him and tells Jesus the whole truth. Now, crowd's watching. They all know her. You know, it's a small town. They all know this woman, and they know that she's the lowest of the low. They know she's not supposed to be there. She's in trouble. Listen to what Jesus says. He says, "Daughter, your faith has saved you." Daughter? You remember that love that Jairus has for his own daughter? Jesus is declaring in front of this huge crowd that same love to this poor, wretched, banished woman as he calls her daughter. No longer is she an outcast. She is fully restored to her community and her church, because remember now, she couldn't go to the synagogue before. She wasn't able to worship her God in the temple. But now she is fully restored with one word, daughter, to both her community as well as her relationship with God. Now watch this, okay? Her flow of blood separated her from both her community and God in the same way that our sin separates us from the community of the saints in God. And when Jesus hung and died on the cross, he looked at you, he looked at me, he calls us sons and daughters. And when the blood flowed out of him, he restored us to the possibility of an eternal healing from our own sin. But now things start to go south. Things take a turn. The servants from the house of Jairus come forward and they tell Jairus that your daughter is dead. Now, I have been involved in many tragedies in ministry, but I am hard pressed to think of anything that is more painful than losing your child. It's not supposed to happen that way. What a horrifying moment for Jairus. No need to bother the teacher anymore. She's dead. The Greek word here is apopanine, meaning it's over, right? Can you just imagine the look on Jairus' face? His whole world crashing down. Everything that he ever cared about is gone. His life has turned to gray. There is no hope. Maybe you've been there, my friend. Watch this. Look at what Jesus says. Disregarding the message that was reported from the synagogue or to the synagogue official, what does he say? He says, "Do not be afraid. Just have faith." In other words, stay with me. Look at me. Don't be distracted. Keep your eyes on me. Just have faith. Paul describes faith as belief in that which is seen and hope for that which is not yet manifested. Jesus is pretty much saying here, don't rely on what you think you know. Don't rely on what you see. Don't rely on the evidence that is being presented to you. Don't fear false evidence appearing real. Put your hope in me. St. Augustine puts it very well, as he has the habit of doing, when he said, understanding is the reward of faith. So do not seek to understand, but seek to believe so that you may understand. In other words, what Jesus is trying to tell Jairus, and by extension, you and I today, well, that's you and I today, is simply this. Do not try to figure this thing out. Just hold on to me. So back to Jairus. They enter the house. There's a great commotion. There's wailing. There's moaning. Jesus says, why all this weeping? Why all this commotion? The child is not dead. She's sleeping. And they laugh at him. So he puts everybody outside. He goes inside. He's confronted with apanine, right? Apapanine. He takes that gray little hand, and I love the words here, Talitha Quam. It means, little girl, I say to you, rise. The Greek word here for rise is anastatized, which translates as resurrected. So what does this mean to us? So many years later, this story of healing, how can we take this and apply it into our daily living? Well, I guess we can start by understanding that, Jesus could have come down to earth and arranged the stars in a constellation of the cross if he wanted to. He could have tossed a mountain into the sea. He could have. But it seems like everything that he did was all connected with one thing. And that one thing, as I had mentioned before, was and continues today to be compassion. Because that's what he's all about. Whether it was the highest of the high or the lowest of the low, he loves us all. And he's knocking at your door right now. In fact, I imagine he's been knocking for a while. Why don't you let him in today so that he can turn your gray into a brilliant shade of blue? Every day in this country, somebody does something nice for somebody else. Today, why don't you let that somebody be you? This is Daily Living. I'm Father Chapin. Hope you can come back next week and we'll do it again. Until then, I hope you let God live in your life. And I bless you in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit.